So I'd like to begin tonight with a piece by François Helon, a monk in 1651 to 715. When the cure begins. As the light increases, we see ourselves to be worse than we thought. We are amazed at our own former blindness, as we see issuing forth from the depths of our heart a whole swarm of shameful things. And you have to remember, this is François Helon, a monk in the 16th century, like filthy reptiles crawling from a hidden cave. We never could have believed that we had harbored such things, and we stand aghast as we watch them gradually appear. But while our faults diminish, the light by which we see them waxes brighter, and we are filled with horror. Bear in mind, for your comfort, that we only perceive our malady when the cure begins. We only perceive our malady when the cure begins. So tonight I would like to just explore with you some of those things that kind of hold us in captivity. What the reptiles that hold us for periods of time as we kind of expose ourselves to our own workings. So this is actually this is one of my poems from the 90s. And the first one's actually that I wrote. I used to write poems, and as soon as I would write them, I threw them away in the 90s. And this one, somewhat, I wrote it, and I gave it as a part of a talk back in the 90s sometime. And somebody 5 years later came and brought it to me and said this had changed their lives. And so I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't be throwing them away. As I was pushing on, the wall appeared. Falling to my knees, I cursed it, one time closing down, silent, withdrawn, letting go of the longing, the wanting to arrive. Out of some deep passageway, my hand begins to move across the cold, smooth stones. Fingers already knowing where to go. Finally coming around the corner, opening not only the eyes, but everything. Slowly getting up, walking on. No questions, no hesitation. Opening to a breath, a step, a breath, a step, a breath, a step. So the night that the Buddha, after his recognizing that he had been in austerities, they say, there was somewhere between 6 and 7 years, and he had pushed and pushed in a sense of really had to do with transcendence. And I think you know what I mean by that. Whether it was, for him it was fasting and we always think of austerities in the sense of, India, the bed of nails or whatever. And his whole experience was based on the fact that he was trying to somehow get out of this. Right? And that if he could just transcend it, then he would find a peace of mind. Now, the problem was he had 4 teachers, and the last teacher had sort of experienced the 7th of these absorptions, the 7th jhana, and so he taught him what was known as the 8th jhana, so supposedly the the highest India of the time that could be experienced. And being someone who had great discipline and great sort of karmic propensity or forces, he was able to go into the 8th jhana. And they say that at that point he, when he came out of it, he was walking through the marketplace and realized that even though he could transcend this, he was not free, and that he had not, that he still had degrees of wanting and aversion, which meant there was still a state of delusion that he perceived himself to be unconscious of. And as the story goes, he then goes, he's with 5 of his friends, and he really decides to take a different path internally. And for the external view of that, he, as the story goes, he goes under this tree, and this tree is where is the village tree, where people of village come and make their offerings for fertility and for all sorts of different sort of earth rites, you could call them. And the story goes that this woman, Sujata, this is still one of my favorite stories, and I tell it almost every retreat because it's that piece of the male part of the transcendence where he realizes, no, there has to be some kind of, that the middle way is some kind of balance of forces. And at that time he is sitting under this tree, emaciated, having pushed himself to the outer limits, if you could say, body-wise, mind-wise. And his change is that he realizes that there has to be another way. And so in the times in India, it was not as a sadhu, as a kind of a spiritual seeker and mendicant. One of the things was in the Brahmic system that they were not allowed in any way to receive, I know this is kind of bizarre, but that it had to go through male hands to be given to them. And that was sort of the way they kept their purity or whatever. And the Buddha said he suddenly revolted against the whole system he had been brought up in as a Brahmin. And they say, the story is Sujata was, she had had her first child in India at that time, and probably even somewhat today. She probably was 14. Probability. She was a beautiful 14-year-old who had just had a child and was going to make this offering of rice milk and called kheer. And one of the things about kheer in some of the in the rites and rituals was it was also considered a representation of mother's milk. And she was going to present this to the tree, and as an offering to the tree spirit and the tree gods. And there was, under the tree, was this emaciated mendicant who in all rights, should have refused her. But instead, he actually accepts the care that she offers, and he eats it. And there's some discrepancy here in story, because anything 50 years ago that I could tell you now probably is shaded. So if you go back 500 years, how about another 500 years? Go back 2,500 years. So I don't, this is just, they're stories, but they're all the mythologies of this. And the mythology was that, in this case, the Buddha, whether it was that meal or they say that she came back every day also for 7 days and fed him until he was strong enough to go from there down to the river. And there he wove what they call kusha grass, and he wove something to sit on, which then he took and took across the river. It was about 2 kilometers, mile and a half, to the Bodhi tree. But what's really significant to me is that that's when he changes the direction of incentive transcendence into what we know as his practice of the middle way, or transforming what is already known true. And so at that point, he, by accepting that, in many ways I see it as that's the inclusion of the transformation, had to be an inclusion of the feminine part. And so he actually accepted the feminine as part of the process of awakening. And then he goes and he sits under the tree, recognizing that somehow there was a totally different approach here. And the approach had to do somehow with his capacity. He says simply that he uses the term the dam of mindfulness, that it could hold back the rivers of delusion. And for us, that what happens is that he goes and he makes a resolve that he's not going to move until he's fully awakened. Now, to get that resolve, as story goes, is that he, over lifetimes, he worked on creating the strength to make that resolve so he could sit that night and, they say, confront the 10 armies of Mara. And Mara is known as the tempter, and really kind of in the polarity of duality of forces, the kind of right and wrong and all this stuff, that he sat down and said, I will in myself kind of confront these dragons or these demons, and not be swayed. And so there's a wonderful kind of, I love these Tibetan paintings, and there's the paintings in Sarnath where he gave the first teaching of the Four Noble Truths. There's in the main temple there is this wonderful picture of the Buddha, and in that picture there is sort of him with his halos sitting there as a mendicant, and then the 10 armies of Mara are coming, and there's kind of these spears and swords and arrows and kind of dancing maidens, and all sorts of all the distractions that are there around him, and they hit his force. And as they hit his force, they turn into flowers. And as they come closer to him, they turn into petals and drop then to his feet. A wonderful image.
Yeah, really.
Of how this all works, actually. You know. And by now you know a few of the demons, I suspect, or kind of entrapments, or your, the things that pull you away from here, whether it's stories, past, future, longings, judgments, anger, fear, all of it. These are the things that come and address us. And I wish I could say, well, actually we come here just for peace. And that you all sit down and, it's really nice and comfortable and your body's just fine and, you open your heart and great, wonderful, images and things come and you have such bliss and your mind gets calm like, the great ocean. And, shoot.
So-called dreaming.
So we come to work on this. It is actually, in a way, I think sometimes these retreats is a setup. It's a setup to slowly draw out the things that aren't transformed yet. And eventually, what I see is things do get transformed here. Those arrows and spears and that they turn into flowers and then eventually fall as petals. But I didn't say how long. Unfortunately, there has to be repetition. The Buddha, they say, sat until the morning light when he, as it came up, he experienced, he went from being, and this is always it just amazes my mind because I can't comprehend this at all. He went from being Gautama Siddhartha of the Sakya clan to a fully awakened being. I can't imagine. Part of my mind, they say that's one of the four unthinkables is the range of a Buddha. Of what they know. And what does that mean is that they become nature itself. They become Dharma itself. I mean, this is my kind of view of it. So there's nobody there but the knowing. And so one of the beauties of this in the storytelling is after his awakening, and I'll play with this for a minute. He begins, he spends 49 days and goes through these 7-day periods where he goes back through his lives and what we know is the investigation of karma, which to me is very much when you first come to this practice. I know for me it was sort of life review, and you kind of go back and you kind of keep going back until you kind of know or clean up some of the distances that go back. And what he did, of course, he went back 900 lives. So what the heck? That's what I mean. It's not for us, if you can get back to, somewhere back there, you're doing good, And also then there are, these, where he would go into transpersonal states, kind of the aligning himself with the forces of the universe, of this kind of transcendent knowledge. Interesting story, which I said to somebody today, I forgot, but was that, as story goes, after this whole time there, and he realizes that he can't keep them can't keep this to himself, you know. And as story goes, is that again, one of the heavenly beings, he said, well, I'm just going to, you know, what am I going to do with this? People aren't going to get what I know. You know, it's he just simply said it's too subtle and sublime for people. So he just wasn't going to, he was just going to go off and, you know, be enlightened. There's only one little catch to this, and it's true for all of us, is that if you look on the 5th page in the back column, there's a small part of the contract. And that part of the contract says that this is not, you can't, and it seems like this has been over the ages, you can't not support others. Right. So for him, what happened, his transpersonal, or his like third eye of his kind of psychic mind or psychic life opened, and what he saw was that there were many people who simply had a small amount of dust on their eyes, was the comment. And that his heart was so moved by this that he decided he would teach. You know? So he then began to walk from Bodh Gaya to where the Ganges is, to what is known as Varanasi or Benares, and where he had spent time. And so he begins walking, and it's a hell of a walk. I mean, this guy walked and walked, you know. And as he was walking, he came across a young seeker. Now, karmically, this is just amazing to me still. But he also, you know, there's no accidents in that kind of situation, nor are there here. Is that he came across this young mendicant, and the young mendicant saw him walking, and noticed that this man, there was something actually shining about him. And he went up to him and said, you know, I don't know what you are. Are you some kind of god? Are you some kind of, you know, deva or angel, or, you know? And at each time, as the kind of the mythology speaks, he says no. And even when he's asked, is he a man? He said no. Okay. And then this young man said, well, what are you then? And at that point he said, I am a Buddha, which simply translates, I am awakened. Now, this man was, you know, he was speaking from the absolute, because that's where he had been. So he actually came as a non-dual being who was awakened, who didn't know exactly what the next step was, because it was not revealed to him yet. But this young man, like all things, comes to us to give us some information. And so when he presented himself as the one who was awake, this man did not get it. And just think, I mean, if you were the first one to meet the Buddha after all this time, and you didn't get it, and he walked on, now what kind of karma is that? Right? I mean, if you look at it from one way, but if you look at it from that this was also a being who was coming to give us a gift. And what the gift was that that teaching of the absolute that he was not ready for yet. He was still caught in the relative. And so at that point, the Buddha walks on for days and days and days. And the next thing we know of it is that he goes to Sarnath, outside, some kilometers outside of Benares or Varanasi. And he meets his 5 friends, who by then just think he's just, you know, a loser. You know, I mean, they're ready to leave him. You know, he's screwed up. You know, and you know, they no longer believe him. They don't trust him. They have lost all of their kind of faith.
Why is that?
Because he had broken the rules, right? He had not stayed within the community, but had totally gone, according to them, astray, and they lost their faith and trust in him, and yet they had loved him dearly. And as he was walking towards them, they could see that this was not who they imagined or knew him to be, that this was something else. And they say when he came that they actually washed his feet. And it's such an interesting, I've been interested in this thing around feet, because it's something that in cultures over the centuries there's always been this reverence. And one of the things in my kind of journeys, and I've done 9 treks in Nepal now, kind of all over. And in the mountains, one of the things you begin to understand is if you can't walk, you can't eat. Right? If you can't walk, you can't eat. If you can't move into the fields, you can't. It's something that's very primal. And so the feet, to worship them, is the fact that you can move. And if you move, that means you can eat, principally. You can have other problems, but if you can't walk, it's a big problem. So they washed his feet. And then, what did he teach? I said, dukkha. He taught the Four Noble Truths. He didn't teach that, at that point. He taught really the truth of these Four Noble Truths. It was very prescriptive truth. That, okay, we're going to talk about the relative now. And the relative says we can't transcend. What we have to do is know what's here. What was it? Carl Jung says, enlightenment consists not only of seeing the luminous, but in making darkness visible. The latter is much more difficult, so it's far less popular. Far less popular, So our job here is, to, in a sense, to, if I can use the terminology, to reach the light. We have to illuminate or somehow know the dark. And that means that that causes us suffering. First of all, we have to acknowledge the suffering. And I'm sorry to say, it doesn't take too much for that one. It is a visible, knowable, repeatable truth, whether it's body, heart, or mind. What's also true is that there is the causes. And what we're doing here is studying. We're studying our minds and our hearts and our reactions in our bodies that can understand the nature which really has to do with this simple thing of grasping and attachment. And how we, when we don't know it, and we're unconscious, we repeat the habits and the patterns of suffering, believing somehow that it won't happen to us. Right? I'll try it again. It's sort of like that thing. I used to have this thing about my friend that I lived with in India, Joseph Goldstein, who came back to the States actually with me. And I used to, I have great love for him, and I always kind of thought of, have you read Hermann Hesse's Narcissus and Goldman?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there was always this piece about he was kind of a lofty, my kind of lofty, wise friend who, you know, for him, if he stuck his hand in the fire and he pulled it out again and it burned, he wouldn't stick his hand back in. But I was the type that if I stuck my hand in and it burned, I'd pull it out and say, I wonder if it's going to burn again, I'll try it again. You know? I think you know what I mean. You know. So, we learn by this capacity to recognize attachment and grasping, really the causes and conditions of our suffering. And that as we begin to recognize, and this really is a constant repetition of the study of this from its grossest level to the subtlest movement, which is so phenomenal, you know, of how we, you know, in such subtle ways we sit there and you know, there's a discomfort somewhere. And our practice is actually to turn towards it and allow it to inform us. But we have so many subtle ways that we either want to turn away from it, we want to fix it, we want to somehow deny it, you know, transcend it, whatever. But we don't allow it to inform us. No. And the practice here is ultimately we allow it to inform us. You know? And on some level, what is the informing of it? The informing of it is basically there's what? Doesn't come in too many flavors. It comes as the sensation is pleasant, unpleasant, or we're spaced out. You could call it neutral, or we just don't get it. You know, that's kind of what happens. And sometimes those neutral, if you look long enough, you'll find out that it's either pleasant or unpleasant. That's kind of our lot. Okay? Now, the simplicity of that is that this, and they use the word Vedana, which translates as in the contact there is the feeling, and in the feeling is this pleasantness, unpleasant, neutral. And then at that moment, what happens is that if we grasp, or we get attached, or we want to push it away, we're in the karmic wheel. But what's being practiced here is we experience that on sometimes very subtle levels, and we don't do anything. We allow it to be what it is. You know, it's not that pleasantness is going to be different. It's not that unpleasantness is going to be different. It's simply going to inform us, and we're not going to do anything with it. Okay? And so we're actually getting the impact of, to me, what life is presenting. And then at that time, what happens is the mind begins to train itself towards, you could say, acceptance. You know, there has to be some kind of acceptance there. And that acceptance, then as it begins to refine itself, because in each of those moments of pleasantness or unpleasantness, consciousness arises and makes that contact. And in the liking and disliking, there is a creation. And that creation is the identity that happens. You know, I like it or I don't like it. You know, it's that simple. You know. But as we begin to go more towards the bare experience, you know, which is underneath the story, underneath the identification, is simply the pleasantness, unpleasant, and just being with it. is we begin to deconstruct. We deconstruct the reactions first. We first have to see them and feel them and get blown away by them and get, like, holy smoke. I don't know if I want to do this. It seems endless. But actually this works. And what happens, it begins to then, that reactivity, we begin to get underneath the reactions themselves and find, they use the word equanimity, this sense of non-reactivity. And the mind begins to calm. The heart simply is open. And a steadiness begins to happen. And sometimes it's not something we even know is happening. So much of this stuff is not, it's so subtle. It's why, and one of the things in Asia, like particularly in the Burmese tradition, and some of the and in the Tibetan and in some of the Thai forest traditions, this stuff is mystical. It's esoteric. It's not, we see one dimension, and we go around walking in this one dimension. And what happens is it starts to break up. We don't even know it's breaking up, but it's still one dimension. And it's because we're not attaching or grasping. And that equanimity is there. And if it becomes stable enough, then there is a phenomenal thing that happens. And the phenomenal thing, as Jung said, he used the word enlightenment. But what happens is there's a break in consciousness. So the consciousness and the object of self or seeing or smelling or tasting or hearing is broken for a moment. In that moment, there is two aspects to this. One is referred to as, which I really will refer most to, but I have to say that there is this other, which is, that comes when the consciousness and the mind breaks. So consciousness and the object break. And there's an enlightenment experience. It means that there's a permanent break for a moment. And the Buddha talked about that as the third noble truth, this nibbana, that's an actual experience, or they also refer to as stream entry, because the mind then breaks its tenacity, and yet it's still caught in its journey. And it can't get out of its journey, so it's caught, but it's beginning this process of, it knows where it's going definitely. And it recognizes certain very fundamental things. And one of the first things it recognizes that that there is no self, that it's simply something that arises due to causes and conditions. So it actually knows that. It also knows, sometimes it's talked about as rites and rituals, but actually it's cultural conditioning. It knows it's not its own cultural conditioning. You're out of time. And I mean that. That's a difficult way of saying it, but we're not caught by that. And there's no, and this is the one that's hard. There's no belief in in a sense, nothing's being, it's all causes and conditions. It's not being, there's nothing holding it all together. There's no one holding it together. It's just, it started at causes and conditions. It's still causes and conditions, and it will be causes and conditions. It's actually very, in the sense of scientific terms, It's a very much rationalist view. But it's also because Nibbana is known as a he referred to it as the super mundane. So it actually is an experience that transcends the one dimension, that we live in. So it's transpersonal in that way. It's beyond the awareness of the personal. So what we see is all one-dimensional due to our senses and our thinking. But that's not all that's going on here. Even though there are laws that hold it, from that super mundane, there's other things going that are not perceivable in immediate one-dimensional kind of reality. So that does exist. It's actually part of this tradition. It is experienceable. It is something that sometimes they talk about. It's passed down from kind of teacher from mind to mind. It's also not caught so much in even a practice point of view. So it could happen in a car accident. It could happen in a detox center. It could happen in someone reading a book in their karmic that balance. It could happen anywhere, anytime. Okay, so it's not, the causes and conditions are really not perceivable or knowable by us so much. So that's really cool. But what is it that we can use in that third noble truth? Actually has to do with what they call momentary nibbana. And momentary nibbana means that in any moment that there is non-grasping, that there is freedom. Any moment there is non-grasping, there is freedom. The problem with it is that we are so entranced by the world of pleasant and unpleasantness, and that we feel our happiness is so caught up in that we can't see what's so. We cannot see momentary nibbana. Okay? And actually what my job is here, in many ways, is actually, first of all, you have to settle enough, and then I have to point to it. I have to say, okay, now, when pleasantness is there, and you're not attracted to it, and you don't move towards it, but you stay here. And yet there's the habit of the mind that says, well, if I go to it, then I'll be happy. Then this is what it's all about. And what is being taught here is that it can arise, but if we don't move towards it, there's no grasping or attachment to it, then what is it that's being experienced? And that's the question. What is it that's being experienced? The thing is, one has this wonderful thing called a charge. Pleasantness has a charge. Unpleasantness also has a charge. And it can be quite intense. And we think that somehow that those intense charges of pleasantness and unpleasantness is how we control and maneuver life.
It's like addiction.
Absolutely. We are addicted to life. Okay? Ultimately, that's kind of what it is. And so what we're trying to do here is, and I'm not saying that's just what's so, okay? That there is the possibility that in the pleasantness or the unpleasantness, there can be enough awareness of not moving towards the object or moving away from the object, but freeing the object. And then doing that, there is a sensation, a feeling. You know, the Buddha simply said, this is where peace lies. It's not, and so we have to define something about what happiness is, and we have to define what is it like to experience peace. You know, non-struggle. You know, in a way, it's kind of the absence of. You know, he couldn't really describe it, only in negatives. So that's descriptive. But what we're talking about is experientially. There is a feeling base here that the addiction itself, when we see the price of it, the dukkha of it, and the the tumultuous and the sheer power of attraction and forces in it, and that understanding wanting, for instance. What does it feel like to lean out of the present in wanting? What is that like? So we're messing with it, and sometimes it's not so obvious. But you get caught up in it, and you forget to hit the pig on the nose. And go, oh. And he goes in the garden and he makes a total wreck of things. And you go, oh, I think I'm getting it. And then the next day, you come back up again, and the pig goes in again. And you go, gosh, I wonder what happened here. Okay, let's be aware, let's be awake. And the pig goes back in again. I mean, it's crazy, right? We're crazy making here. You can drive yourself bonkers here. I guarantee. Maybe you just get tired out of the stories and, chasing the pig and, I don't know. You just go, God, again. I can't believe I got fooled again. But at some point we start to tire out. And that's where I come in. And I say, hey, wait a minute. I wonder if you just relax, and be really mindful and look, what is it like to feel when you're not moving into something or away from something? Wonder if you're just here. Now, what happens is, not rapidly, but slowly we start to change our, it's really our place of value. And I know, and it takes a long time because, the charge is so great, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying you'll suffer. Simple. Nothing big, but you will suffer. And so if you can just have, and life is the trip. It's totally a trip. And we love and hate, and God, we're just crazy. But if we can bring moments of peace in, and we can see that it's possible, and that becomes the ground of your being, the place that you find your friend. And the friend will never be out here, by the way. I love, Ruth Denison used to say, darling, the only thing that will never leave you, the intimacy you want, it's with your breath. It's with your breath. ain't going to leave you till you die, you know. So it's the one that's going to be with you. It's the one you know. You know? And that the more we make friends with that, it is knowable. You know? And that we begin to own the capacity to kind of stay here. You know? The simple mantra, here. You know, where are you? I'm here. What was that? Oh, here. You know, what a great thought. Here. Should I write that down? Yeah. Here. It's, you know, I don't have to be too smart to teach this stuff. You know? But, you know, I like this word, the uncomplicated. And the uncomplicated when you speak of this word equanimity, you know, where there's nothing more important than here. And there's nothing more important than peace. And there's nothing more more recognizable than I used the other night, the potential in what's here. You know, this is all potential. You know, it's a creative, I don't know what force, but I know there's a self-organizing that's going on when I align myself. And we're all here in a way, we're fighting our demons, and we're all also aligning ourselves. Both is going on. And the insight usually comes through difficulty, it seems, unfortunately. You know. But it also, as we go along here and kind of untangle that this sense of peace, that we begin to organize ourselves. You know, with that as our criteria. So we've actually changed our kind of ground of being. You know. Now the truth of it is, which seems very fearful in the beginning, is that the thing that's true about here is that there's nothing solid that can be known. So it's actually a type of groundlessness, you know, that we have to learn in some way to find the stability in the flux or the movement itself, in the groundlessness. And we don't like that. And that's what the training is actually training in the not knowing or the groundlessness. And so instead of going into fear, which is the primal response to the groundlessness, we switch it. We go towards the peace. And we say, I can't hold yesterday and I can't move in tomorrow. I can only be here. And therefore, I can ride. This is all I know. And so then the groundlessness cannot have a past or a future. It can only be here. And so you begin to relax. Say, I don't know. And a lot of I don't know has to go on. And yet the nature is I want to know. Right? But then that becomes more of the ground. One of the things about the groundlessness and, in a sense, not going towards the contraction, which is the fear, and one goes more towards the openness and the recognition that the grasping just brings suffering. Then the complexity of separateness begins to break down. Which is all based on, my view, my experience. That begins to break down naturally. You don't have to do anything about it. It's not necessary. And the result of that here is that in the non-separateness, it recognizes that everybody's in the same boat. So any confusion that exists is based on suffering. Period. Period. So the awareness of the here then begins to move towards a sense of non-separateness. And the non-separateness moves towards that experience of where the Buddha first met the young mendicant, and he said, I am awake. No. And he didn't qualify it. He didn't say there's suffering or not suffering. He said, I am awake. And therefore he no longer it was not a dualistic world. It was a world of oneness, or non-dual, or non-separateness. And that was, so the beginning was actually the end. But there was the journey, and we're all in the journey somewhere. What he called the Eightfold Noble Path. And we're all somewhere involved in that process. The path. And those are the teachings. So there's confusion. There's the causes for confusion. There's freedom. And there's a path. As I was pushing on, the wall appeared. Falling to my knees, I cursed it. One time, closing down, silent, withdrawn, letting go of the longing, wanting to arrive out of some deep passageway. My hand begins to move across the cold, smooth stones. Fingers already knowing where to go. Finally, coming around the corner, opening not only the eyes, but everything. Slowly getting up, walking on. No questions, no hesitation. Opening to a breath, a step, a breath, a step. a breath, a step. Let's just sit for a moment.